Councilmember Khalid, Councilmember Baker.
Present.
Also present is Honorable Mayor Bill Edwards, City Attorney Amelia Walker, and City Manager Odie O'Donnell. You have a quorum.
Okay. First item, please.
The first item on the agenda and previous item agendas, discussion on implementation of Urban Redevelopment Agency, URA Finance Director.
Good afternoon, Mayor Edwards and the council members. As you recall, during our last meeting, you approved the 2019 mid-year budget amendment. And that amendment is able to cover all operating expenses. However, during the same budget amendment, there were capital projects that were to be funded through URA creation. And with me today, I have the financial advisor who is here, then the bond attorney may be joining us. The city attorney is here to explain how we go about, and also when, if ever possible, after the creation, after your adoption, when do we expect to have the funding? Because without that, all those capital projects we have will not be operational until we have the funding. So URA creation is the source of funding all capital projects. We moved all capital projects from operating into capital projects area where we can borrow money to fund it, because we can't fund operation with the borrowed money. So with that said, I'll leave it into the hands of our financial advisor. The city attorney will lead the discussion.
Madam Clerk. Guns are not showing.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council.
Speak to it. Madam Clerk. Mr. Khalid, this one. Go right ahead.
Thank you, sir. So y'all know we talked about creating an urban redevelopment agency in order to issue debt for capital items. Y'all know we talked about the development authority didn't have the power to do projects for governmental issues. So in conjunction with your staff, Frank, Doug Selby, Amelia Walker, and I have worked together to prepare a resolution for you. I think y'all have two versions before you today, and both of them create a URA, and it's up to you all to decide who you want to be the membership of the board. After that, I want us all to get together and come up with what projects we want to finance, and then about 60 days after that, the money will be available.
Is there another speaker? You want to add something?
I think in previous conversations, I know this conversation is less about the resolutions, but more so I believe that the treasurer wanted to highlight the activities that I'm not sure council might have been aware of. So remember that the key takeaway is you had a proposed budget that included capital funding and regular operational expenditures. Since that time, through the modification, the treasurer has moved the the funds for capitals into operations, meaning that your URA will be the funding source for your capital improvements. And until such time as you borrow those funds, capital activities are on hold. And I think that is the purpose and the importance of the conversation, and the key takeaway is that which most cities do, and is the appropriate thing to do, is to fund your capital projects through your debt service and fund your operations through your revenues. And so your treasurer has aligned those things for you, and just wanted to highlight that, you know, the action to approve the modification just aligns that, but you still at some point have to approve a URA and allow them to be able to borrow to fund those activities. So I just think that's the synopsis of the conversation that you're having.
Mr. Mayor, I have a
Doing the legislation that I am proposing, my resolution, I did do some extensive research, and I've passed out the research to the city council, because there were several things that were mentioned. One, somebody mentioned there was an overlap between the development authority and URA, which I found not to be true. The members on the development authority in most cities that I have researched, and you see all of the cities that I have researched, and I have Fulton County on here because Fulton County was the only Metro Atlanta area city, Metro Atlanta municipality that I found that did have a URA. Most of the cities do not have a URA. Most of the cities have development authorities or either downtown development authorities. None of them have elected officials acting as the chair. All of them operate separate from the city, and their city attorney is not a legal advisor. And I've called and spoke with some of the economic development directors, two being College Park, one being College Park and one being East Point. And they gave me their city attorney's names, and they said it is not true that their city attorney is acting as the attorney for the development authority. They said there was some overlapping in College Park. However, because their development authority attorney resigned, but they immediately put out an RFP, and they hired an attorney. Now, I did find that some elected officials are serving on the development authority, but simply as members, except for Atlanta. Atlanta has Invest Atlanta, and they have a strong mayor, and Fairman has a strong mayor. For the URA that I found, Fulton County has one, and Fulton County has appointed all of their Fulton County commissioners to the URA. And they have a development authority where they have one elected official on that development authority, and that's Brandon Beach. He's a state legislator. So the legislation that I am proposing, with the boundaries that I got consensus from my colleagues on, is I am requesting that we appoint the city council to the URA.
Go ahead.
Sure.
And I definitely don't want to touch on the resolution in any way. I think one of the things we just wanted to highlight in addition was the document that you received again, and I won't speak on behalf of the treasurer. I'll let him kind of step up and address this himself, but just to highlight the areas for projects that have already been approved and the new requests that would be funded by the URA have been passed out to you guys. And so again, just wanted to highlight that those activities are the capital projects that even if they have been approved, remember the philosophy, and definitely one that I support, is to fund those through the finance and in-depth service, whereas the other activities have been funded through operations. So again, I know that you guys later today will be addressing resolutions and all that good stuff. I just wanted to highlight the position that we're in, and
I understand, thank you, and I just want to just, appeal to my colleagues that we should never approach economic development in a divisive way. And we should never approach economic development where there's just a silo of people who's trying to control all of our economic development. I think this is a fair way for all of us to have some say in what happens with economic development, and that is to appoint the entire council to the URA.
I got a question. Mr. Walter.
Yes, sir, Mayor.
The URA would be considered public dollars, am I correct?
Yes.
The development authority would be more so private money, right?
Yes, sir.
So my issue is, if it's public dollars,
who is more suitable to be in charge of those funds other than the people who the public have voted on? I mean, I wouldn't want to merge the thing. Let it be what it is. We all 8 of us here are responsible. We put our names on the ballot. Responsible for public funds. That's the trust part of what we're doing. So if there's any, I can't see us having any manner in which we would join the two. That's a bit much. Have you found anybody to join the two?
Nope. And also what I found, where I'm very concerned, and I've mentioned quiet about this, but it's time for our citizens to get involved. What I found that on most of the development authorities, you have people with legal backgrounds, financial backgrounds, or people who've done major economic development deals. And I am very concerned. And our development authorities just be informed. They have a lot to learn. They have a lot of training they have to do. And I am not comfortable with when they have to learn how to just operate the development authority. I am not comfortable with appointing them as our URA with public dollars. No.
Just to let everybody know, my computer is not working something on this, so she's keeping, please log on to the system because the clerk is keeping the system.
Yeah, the system, the queue's not working for us.
Oh. All right then, let me give Mr. Khalid, let me get my notebook out.
Okay, so my first, could you guys both come up? You guys want to come up at the same time? My first question is, I was working a lot with the DDA, so that is where I focus my expertise. Right? Be that what it is. And I know that the DDA has required, there's like state mandated training. Is there, go ahead. Is there mandated training for URA board members and Development Authority board members? Are there any state mandated trainings by
I know of none, Council.
Okay. How often would you expect for the URA or the DDA, I'm sorry, or the DA, how often would you expect them to meet in the first year? Would they meet more than once a month?
So, Doug Selvey, Hunter Andrews Kerr. So the typical sort of function of the URA would really be to approve projects that this council, mayor and council approve. And so they typically, particularly as they're currently used, only meeting when they're enacting some project that you delegated to them or asked to contract with them. And it's distinct from a development authority or a downtown development authority, which is really more sort of economic development market facing, in the sense that they would be interacting with developers who are coming to perhaps do an incentive, seek an incentive from you. Now, the Downtown Development Authority or Development Authority also can do city-led initiatives, but it's more of a combination of they're facing the economic development community. The URA, as it's currently used by most cities, which is really only primarily to do governmental projects, is really only doing that which the mayor and city council would ask of it. So I've typically seen URAs perhaps meet around the time that they're doing a project, maybe 2 or 3 times in a year that it takes to get the project approved, bond financed, and closed, and then not again until they have another project, which could be a year or 2 later. So unlike a development authority or downtown development authority, which might have monthly meetings, URAs are sort of episodic. They're going to show up whenever the city council asks for them to show up. It's my experience. Ed, I don't know if you have a different experience.
I wish I could speak as eloquently as Doug can, but, so the URA just meets when y'all want them to, and the Development Authority or DDA meets every month.
So, would you say, is it the case, let's say there are 3 projects going on at once. Does that happen? Can a URI, because it sounded like you kind of suggested that maybe it would take 2 or 3 meetings to execute a project. And so, let's say we have 4 projects. Do we have to do those consecutively, or can we do them concurrent?
Just for economies of scale, you probably do them all at once. If you knew all 4, you'd probably do them all at once, so you could combine the cost and just sort of get it done once more cheaply.
I mentioned those things because I do, looking at the agenda for today, with the DA, the URA, we also have a Parks Advisory Board, and there's another board, the Finance Board, and they all have members of council on it, up to 3 members, maybe more members of council. There are only 8 of us, right? So we're already meeting twice a month. I've suggested meeting 3 times a month, and people kind of bucked against that. So I just think that we have to be careful as we are setting up these boards that we're appointing ourselves to. We could easily, by this time next year, be meeting 5 times a month for various boards and committees in addition to our 2 regular meetings. So that, I just think that's something we should be cognizant of. My last question is for our city manager, and that is, you made the very good point that we have moved current infrastructure projects off of our general fund budget because we're going to be doing this URA. Could you just go over what projects do we have in the queue now that are no longer going to be funded if we do not enact this?
So they're actually on that list, they're actually on that list that you've been provided, and again, I would defer to the treasurer on that type of financial activity because he's actually moved those items into the capital projects. I defer to him.
So it's the whole list that was being distributed here, and if you add some more projects, will be in addition to those projects. All of them, the first one on top there is the public safety building, $1.4 million. And the total of those projects, I think, is $5.3 million.
I see like just park improvements. Is the mold remediation that we were working on, is that?
The mold is on the other side. The mold is to do with the fire stations.
We also had an issue with mold in our parks, did we not? In Sandtown?
So it could be part of that, but much of it that was fine.
I just want to be clear on that, because what I don't want is that we get into a back and forth about this, and then it turns out like for months, we don't address critical issues
So
like mold and fire.
as long as it was submitted during the budget amendment on mods parks, then it's part of that.
Right, but then, is it part of the budget amendment, or did we move it off with all the other capital projects are all those things on hold until we pass this URA?
So that one, I think, would be, it's part of it. Unfortunately, the tax director is not here, but they included in the budget amendment, and that's the list of all capital and budget amendments.
So that will be done regardless of whether we get this passed?
You have to pass it for this one to be done. If this one doesn't pass, there's nothing out of that line that is going to be done, out of that list.
Is anyone else confused by that?
No.
Okay. I'm not sure whether the mold in Sandtown Park is part of this list or not, because it just says park improvements.
No, I think he's saying that any capital improvement will be, please correct me if I'm wrong.
If you see the 500,000 for parks, that's where the most is the budget manager has
So
gone
he's
from.
saying all capital activities will be funded through the debt attainment.
So anything on operational that you have approved the budget amendment, they are working on that one. We gave them the green light today. But anything on that paper you have will not be done until you approve the creation of the URA.
One final question.
Yes,
I'm sorry, this is actually for you, Mr. Wall, and Mr. Sullivan. There's a long list of projects here.
Yes.
It's my understanding, and just correct me if I'm wrong, when we go to issue these bonds, which our taxpayers will be backing, right, with
Yes.
their property taxes,
Yes.
it is possible to put these items on a ballot for taxpayers to vote on, or not?
Yes, sir. You can do it either way.
So could we list each individual one, or do they vote for them as a package, like the T-Splosh? Like, how would we write that up?
Georgia law requires you to have an election with your obligation bonds for like classes of properties. You have to have one vote for libraries, one vote for parks, one vote for recreation, one vote for roads, one vote for city hall. It has to be, like years ago, DeKalb County had 250 million on the ballot, but it was 4 separate votes because it was 4 separate types of projects. The URA doesn't require that, you lump it all together.
Does the amount appear on, is that required for that to appear on the question? Like
It is.
this much for this and this much for this?
Yes, sir.
I think our voters would be happy to hear that.
Ms. Brown?
One of the things I wanted to add is relative to, I mean, we talked about a number, and I hope this list covers a whole list. It seems like repairs and not necessarily any enhancements to our park facilities. Is that something that we would want to consider if we have to go through this process of putting it on the ballot, and when would it be on the ballot?
So, what we had hoped, the staff, you all would take this list and add to it. And remember, in my numbers, every 10 million is about a quarter of a mil, 0.25 mil. And so this was a list that was in the budget, but we wanted you to add to it projects that you thought was very much needed, and have you all vote as a group to add some projects to this list. This isn't a wish list. This was really just the stuff that was in your CIP and issued budget. Does that make sense?
Right.
Okay. And so, as it relates to that, it definitely seems that we need to have a different kind of conversation. Of course, this covers things we knew about, but we've all talked about, making some additional improvements in our facilities that may not be reflected, because these were kind of like the stuff that leave as opposed to.
Well, one other thing I'd like to add to that, Mr. Mayor, if I could. So when y'all approve the URA, the next step is the URA is going to approve its territory, where you're going to have an urban redevelopment plan.
Right.
And so this, whatever project you pick, has got to be in that area.
Same territory, right?
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Ms. Gilligan?
The only thing that I wanted to add is that very shortly, so it's going to take 60 days before this is up and running and we get money or whatever. Then we're going to be in the cycle where we're going to be dealing with next year's budget. And so it's timely for us then, well, not then, but from now up to then, to be talking about our priorities for our next budget year. That's when we should be dealing with whatever the extra is. You know what I mean? At least that's what I think.
Yes, ma'am, and I want to reiterate, too, I think you all really need a strategic plan.
Exactly.
A vision.
Thank you.
You will.
All right, any further questions? Anyone else?
Yeah.
Yes. Mr. Baker?
Do we currently have a resolution that's prepared to be voted on for this? I know that I submitted one, don't see it on the agenda. I understand she just stated that she submitted one. And what's the process of moving forward, Mr. Mayor?
I took both off because it had not taken past the legislative process.
So we're just
Kind of a
for
conversation.
edification.
Okay, anyone else?
No, I want to speak to the legislative process. So I went in on last Friday and sat with Mr. Pasco, and we really need to read our process, because if we have a resolution that's less than 10 pages, they have department heads have up to 7 days to respond. Anything over 10 pages, they have up to 10 days to respond. So my stuff went in on the 20th, and it actually did not come out until today. So I guess we will have resolutions on the June 11th agenda for us to vote on.
Okay. Mr. Bates.
Lastly, I just want to say for the record, I've taken everything into consideration that my colleagues have shared. I do have a resolution as well, and given that it's not moving forward, all of these comments are taken into consideration. I think the only thing that is missing is the fact that while we are making these decisions, and yes, we are elected to govern, I think that there should be some community input.
One thing I wanted to say, I think our community input comes via our appointments and making sure we represent and appoint people who can speak to those various issues. And I think we shouldn't forget that, because I do see that we tend to be trending to want to put council people on these various boards. They ultimately have to come to us anyway. They are advisory in nature. So it is like creating double work. And so I think we should trust our appointment process, let them bring the recommendations, because ultimately the council has to vote anyway. They don't set the policy. Now, I'm talking about all boards, very clear.
All right, any further conversation?
Yes, so I want to speak.
Anybody else? If not,
Just one more thing I do want us to keep in mind. We have a Parks Master Plan out, and this isn't really like the conversation, but there was some talk about a strategic plan, and we need to work on our strategic plan, but I thought that we got our strategic plan back. Was that
On the
not
10th.
Was that not it? Is there more to come?
No, so May 10th. So on May 10th, we submitted the draft strategic plan to council for review, input, comments, et cetera. And so there was a schedule presented and a time frame that we requested for feedback. Of course, all of those things are draft, and the council really decides on how that process is going to go. But that's the framework that staff has kind of stuck to throughout this process. So you do have a draft strategic plan, and I think today we received some comments from Councilmember Gilliard that have gone to the consultant. I know that within the first couple of days, you provided some as well. I'm not certain if others have submitted those. Those are the two that I saw, but you have a time frame, and I believe, please don't quote me on this, but it has been provided in writing. I believe it's June 14th was the time frame that we asked, which was a little bit more than a month. And so from there, those items would be incorporated and then brought back to the council.
Yeah, I just mentioned that. I know that our Parks Master Plan is going to be back for some time. I don't even know if it's out yet. We've actually selected the person.
I don't think we have.
Yeah, and we're going to be getting recommendations back, and so I want to just make sure that on our wish list or whatever, that we are saving some money for those things. And then we also have to consider that there is a human resource cost. So for everything that we build and everything that we fix up, we will have to hire staff to maintain. And it's my understanding from some of the facility staff that we're already kind of understaffed in that area. So I think it will be important, you know, whether it's the DDA or whether it's the DA, we should be looking for some development that actually generates new revenue to help pay for all of these things that we're going to build and fix up so that they can stay nice. That's it.
okay. Any further? Hearing none, we'll move on to the next item.
Next item is discussion with council on realignment of council meetings. We have passed out something for you to look at, and this is just for you to look at. There's no request for any decisions to be made on this, but this is, you have requested something in writing, so we gave you this to review, and we can discuss it at a later time, or if there are any questions, we'll try to our best to answer them.
To get this out today?
Yes.
All right, well, it's not enough time.
Yeah.
I would rather,
But if you want to ask any questions about what's on here.
Once you just generally talk to it, they may not be ready for anything right now. Just kind of generally highlight some of the things.
Well, the idea is to have the first meeting, which is the first meeting of the month. The second Tuesday will be organized as a work session meeting. The work session will begin at its usual time, 5 p.m. There will be no meeting intended for this meeting, no voting. All items will be explained, discussed, and debated by council and mayor. All resolutions, ordinances, and agreements, IGAs, should appear on the work session agenda for your review. And then they're going to the next week for approval. But if you guys are discussing something and can't come to a resolution on it, then it will go to the next work session or to the next meeting if there's questions to be answered. At the regular meeting, the second meeting of the month, which is the fourth Tuesday, public comments, zoning items, proclamations will be presented, and the meeting starts at 7. The consent agenda will consist of those items from the previous work session which were agreed upon. There may be a limited number of agenda items for discussion. However, the intent is not to have any items on the regular meeting agenda which have not been first discussed at work session. The exceptions would be anything that's an emergency and time sensitive.
Okay, I think it's just, I would ask the colleagues to go back and look at this and peruse it, and we'll come back with any questions that we may have.
Sure. And
What were you saying?
I listed the ordinance that talks about time, place of meetings, and open meetings for your reference. Because that was one of the things you asked about, what did the ordinance read?
Okay, Mr. Khalid, you asked for questions, we're just going to, that'll give opportunity to go over what you go ahead. Lodge, you have first.
Okay, so first, I just want us to be clear that this is an ordinance. So am I correct, Madam Attorney, that it would take 2 reads for us to actually make any change?
That's correct. First, you'd have to actually amend the ordinance to propose the change, and then you'd have to come back for a second read to adopt.
And then my second concern is that when I have tracked the average meeting time that we meet is 5.5 hours, and that's 11 hours a month. And this new structure seems to take 2 of those hours away. And so I'm not clear at how we can take time away unless we're increasing the efficiency of, I don't see anything in here that actually addresses the efficiency issue. So this structure gives us less time than the current structure that we have. Yeah.
Just a quick comment on that. I think that's a very good point. And so I think that what the clerk's office has attempted to do is just kind of create a solution to some of the desires of council. I think in first having all of the information come to you, even sometimes when it's in idea form, and then get feedback and flesh it out before you have to make a decision to not feel rushed. And so I think the purpose, and it doesn't, and I don't want to speak for the clerk's office, but I believe that this format and this proposal doesn't have to be accepted just like this. I think what they're looking for is feedback so that if they have meeting 1, all of this stuff comes to you and you spend an entire meeting, let's say from 5 until 10 o'clock or whatever time it is, fleshing out all of the items and all of the questions that you might have, so that in your regular meeting, those items don't even need to be discussed anymore. They can go on the consent agenda because you fleshed them out, which will effectively save you time in meeting number 2. Because instead of addressing 20 items over 2 meetings, you can address those 20 items or whatever numbers that they are, and then your second meeting becomes a business meeting that is a little shorter. You approve the consent agenda, you have your proclamations and all of those other things, and then that meeting time should theoretically be shorter.
Okay, are you finished, Mr. Williams? Yes. All right, Mr. Williams?
I've actually seen this process work. East Point uses this point, whether it's going to be voted up or down, it will be less time. And so in essence, the way I've seen it work on a regular meeting, most people only have the zoning hearings and they have stuff they're ready to vote on, whether it's voted up or down. And so sometimes things may have to be on a work session 2 or 3 times before we decide, let's move it to the regular agenda. The proclamations, from my understanding, you know, there was a concern, according to what I have read, we all have been doing proclamations wrong, because we got to go back and look at that as well, and that needs to go on a work session, because we're not supposed to be giving individual proclamations according to the legislation that we adopted. And so I like this. I've seen it work. I will encourage you all to go and look at East Point council meetings. Go and look at Union City council meetings. Even look at Atlanta council meetings, because they are using this process. They have a regular meeting once a month, and the rest of the meetings are either work sessions or committees that they're meeting and doing the work and workshopping the work.
Mr. Baker?
I think we do need to reconsider the way we have our meetings, or the way our agendas are set. However, I don't know if we're going back and we're looking at what other people do, but City of Atlanta are full-time council members. Their meetings are 8 hours. They start at 10 o'clock in the morning, so we can't use them as necessarily as our comps. However, I think when you flesh it out, like right now, we're about to just take this and read it when our clerk just explained to us what it's saying. I think this is a perfect opportunity. Right now, we have a real short work session agenda, whereas we could address this, our thoughts, and share and move on, but we tabled a lot of stuff and take away. So if we're going to change this, right, and move forward, that's not going to stop the way that we operate. And we're still going to be here longer. I think that just because we have a presentation and we discuss something in a work session, it doesn't mean that it should go to the consent agenda. There's not, and I mean, who's to say that we agree on whatever it is just because it goes to the consent, like just because we discussed it. I think that this allows that process, that part of the process, allows for a lack of transparency. It allows for things to go on a consent agenda that we'll forget about and we're voting on 2 weeks later, and now all of a sudden it's a situation where we approve things that are a detriment that we didn't actually itemize properly, whereas we know before we go in there what we voted on just because we discussed it at a council meeting 2 weeks prior.
Let me say this. Are you finished, Mr. Baker? You have to go to the intent of what you're doing. The intent of what you're doing is just the reverse of what you just said. If you understand the intent, then you will have no problem having a vote at the regular meeting on the consent agenda item. If we flush that item through, and the only reason why I even suggest that we take a look at this, because nobody wants stuff just put in their hands today and really try to make a decision on it. So giving you an opportunity, we talk about transparency, the community hasn't even seen this yet. And so doing the whole transparency thing, now you add that to the other measures that we have, which is Mr. Pasco's department. You have to add that to your decision on agendas. Because the development of that policy came from this desk, from up here. That we were supposed to go through this whole process. It came from here. And so if it's not done that, the intent of the work session is to flush everything out, to get everything ready, then that intent transfers over to the regular meeting, But all we got to do is govern. I don't seem to see the issue here. But, let me do this, because you want to respond to something I said?
I just think, I think that the concerns are valid, and so it might be good for us to, within this process, clarify that things that the full council is not in agreement on at the next meeting wouldn't go on the consent agenda. Right. It sounds like the delineation is that if there's not a full consensus among the 7 voting members, that any item just goes onto the next agenda for a discussion, and those items that are discussed and all of you are feeling okay about it, et cetera, then go on to the consent agenda.
That's fine.
I think that caveat should be included in whatever the final process is. Just
that's why I say intent. That should be the intent of what we're doing.
Understood. And I listen, wouldn't argue with any of you. I just think that as you look at intent, it's important to incorporate all of the ideas and concessions that are generated by the body. And I know that the intent is for that, but since the document doesn't expressly say it, it might make people more comfortable to explicitly have that included.
Which is more reason why we take the document.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Right.
No disagreement.
Ms. Willis, then Ms. Ross.
I mean, we talked about committee structures and Atlanta having to work 8 hours. I mean, and we're gonna have to address that. Are we really supposed, do we really need to be, as a new city of this size, do we really need to be full-time? Because we're not getting the work done in part-time hours. We actually are classified as part-time, but we all are working full-time. And so that, we need to address that. For a new city this size, do we really need to be part-time? Because I tell you, I look at other cities, and we don't have to reinvent the wheel. There's 538 cities in the state of Georgia. And most cities have committees that council members participate on. Council members participate on these committees along with residents. And they are going to be, if you look at Fulton County, I just looked at Fulton County, they have about 30 committees. And some of the commissioners are on the committees, and some of the commissioners are on the committees with council members. So we need to have, we're gonna have to have that conversation, Mayor. And I just said that if something is not ready to be voted on, it's going to have to go back on a work session until we get to the point we're ready to, I said that. But we do need to address whether or not we need to be full-time or part-time.
Councilwoman Ross.
I think we should also think about a delineation between the two. So in my mind, we have boards where you have zoning. Okay. We have boards where we have zoning, planning, and the like, and they're advisory in nature. Whereas committees that council serve on deal more with the operations of the city. And they are two distinct things, in my opinion. And so I think if we may want to revisit it from that standpoint. I also want to kind of circle back to with this document where we started at. I do appreciate the recommendations or thinking about the fact that we consider a set executive session time as well as a set time for proclamations that starts prior to the meeting. I think that can move things quite a bit along, because I know even in today's meeting, I think we have, 4 or 5 zoning hearings, that's 2.5 hours, we already know. And so to add to that, out of respect, that gets to be a lot, but I do like how we have these times broken out, and I hope we'll, as a body, consider that, taking the earlier time to have people come in who have proclamations. And I think that deals with some of the other things, not having enough time. Look, if it's a proclamation between 6 and 7, we do that and we start our meeting at 7.
Right. Okay. Any other discussion? Yeah.
Councilmember Williams.
Accused over that?
Yeah, well, mine as well. So I think that it would be helpful if we design a process that is driven by the actual work that we have. I was asking Mr. Adams or our city attorney to pull up the list of items that we have in the pipeline, because it's a lot. And Mayor, I know you have a very unbelievable job of trying to pull from that list to decide what's going to be on each meeting. And then you put as much on as you can, and then we don't get to it, or it's like 11 o'clock because we have all these agenda items. And so I just feel like there's a larger, like more existential question that we have. Like we need to look at that work and say, what is the, if I write a resolution or an ordinance today, what is a reasonable expectation for me to see that on an agenda? When there are like 40 or 50 things already in the pipeline, I can't write something and then in 2 months think that it should be on the agenda if there are these other things on the agenda, unless we're having more meetings. I think that does have to do with our committee structure. I think it does have to do with us being full-time council people. I think that we should design a process that we could look at the stuff that we have right now, and we could design a process to say, like, how are we going to tackle this work that we have right now? And I'm just not sure that this is like thorough enough to really address that. And if we looked at the items on the list and we timed out, like, how many hours does it take for us to pass a resolution? How many hours does it take for us to pass a resolution? How many hours does it take for us to pass a proclamation? We multiply that by the number of things that are on the list, and then we know how many hours of work there are. And then we adjust our meeting schedule or create a committee schedule that can actually do that work. Because I think what will happen is, no matter what structure we do, if we're not getting through that work in a fashion that we think is timely, we're going to be frustrated by whatever structure we take. And I think that that's, we don't really, when we come up with these ideas, we don't really think about how long is it really going to take to get through all that stuff.
Mr. Khalid, I do feel we have the legislative process that we adopted. I think is the process that you're talking about, if we adhere to it. That will kind of vet out what needs to happen on that day. And let me just tell you something. One other thing, you can't put this down and nobody wants to listen to it. But we have a lot of redundant conversation up here. We really do. And I think that we're on the issue, and a point is being made. There's no sense in trying to hound that point any further. So we have to consider ourselves, when enough is enough. I can't tell you how to do that. I don't know. There ain't no set rule, except for the fact that we can terminate conversation during a agenda item. So I think we need to keep that in the back of our minds too. But we do have a legislative process that vets everything that we put in. And even things coming from our attorney should go through that vetting process. All right?
Mayor, I would like to move that we recess into executive session to discuss personnel, litigation, and real estate.
Second. Properly moved and second. Any discussion? All in favor? How many was that? 4?
5.
5.
You count me?
Okay. I got you good. 5. All right. Executive session. You don't eat it all in yours?